One.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And it's a solo episode for me today. I'd like to tell you about The Body Shop, which is a store at the mall. A lot of you might have seen. If you're anything like me, you probably walked by it a million times and not noticed it. I mean, if you're in my demographic, you're probably not who tends to shop there. But The Body Shop is it's kind of a bit of a higher end or a bit more expensive, like soap and shampoo and lotion type store. The Body Shop, obviously, they sell stuff that go on your body, largely in the bathroom or the restroom or the washroom or whatever that's called in whatever country you're watching this from. If I would have noticed it at the mall when I was young, I probably would have said, "Oh, that's just some like store where like rich women, spend a little extra money on soap that means nothing." I would not have seen the Body Shop as like a cultural product, as like a cultural sort of place that was meant to be pushing against the mainstream and challenging convention, which I later learned it kind of was meant to be. So much more recently, I read a book called The Culting of Brands, which I've spoken about in previous solo episodes, and I would hold it up now, but it's with all my other books in transit still from California. But I read about The Body Shop in this book as an example of a cult brand, as the author calls it. Now, what made this brand cultish or made the customers very, very dedicated and kind of married to this brand and were willing to spend extra money and to have all their products, as many as possible, be from this store? It's the way that this brand catered to people's environmental sentiments. And this was in the early 70s. So the whole hippie revolution had been well underway for a couple of years, and the culture was certainly ready for something like this. Now, what are the hippies, and how do I think of them? They're like largely young. They saw themselves as rebellious or revolutionary, kind of overturning the status quo, sort of getting rid of the complacent 1950s kind of archetypical lifestyle where your life, excuse me, is predictable, where you need to follow the common procedures, get a job, get married, have kids. No, you can get as high as you want. You can follow your urges, your feelings, and, take the road less traveled, I guess, is how I would categorize the hippies. And you could probably draw that movement and that whole sort of revolution as being related to the philosophical teachings that came out of the university. So I'll recommend Ayn Rand's essay collection book, Return of the Primitive, where she has some very unkind words about the hippies and the so-called free speech movement coming out of the universities around that time. And Ayn Rand, I think, ties the hippies and the various degenerate youth to the rejection of reason in the classrooms, the way that these youngsters had been taught that reason is basically impotent, that the individual can't quite look at reality firsthand and objectively understand what he's looking at and then act rationally. So this rejection of reason we see all through philosophy, all over the place. And another thing we see in the history of philosophy, and even earlier than the advent of philosophy, so I think as far back as you go in the history of man doing something, that is, from the moment man began thinking on some level and doing things beyond just range of the moment, animalistic subsistence, I think you could see the separation of mind and body. So when man becomes supernatural, believes in the supernatural, we're going way back, prehistoric, early man beginning to believe in the various spirits that are running the world. You could say he believes in, like, his mind is in one place where his mind has gone now to a place where the supernatural exists, but his body is very much living in this dimension where everything has a nature, and supernaturalism is a contradiction. There is no such a thing. The separation of the mind and the body has plagued man all through history, and I would say, for whatever my opinion is worth, it looks a lot like Ayn Rand solves that problem. So check out her philosophy and read her books for more on that. Now, through the history of philosophy, you see philosophers either embracing the body and rejecting the mind in one way or another, or vice versa, embracing the mind and rejecting the body. You can see them breaking off into separate schools, the empiricists and versus the rationalists. You know, the empiricists famously known for embracing the five senses, saying your five senses, they give you facts, or they access reality. Ideas, though, ideas are just kind of fake. This is, of course, my attempt to summarize what they're saying. On the flip side, you've got the rationalists embracing ideas and pure logic. You know, pure logic, that's true. You know, logic is impenetrable. But the senses, what do the senses give you? They say, oh, it gives you this distorted, biased, very limited access to reality. So even if your senses are somewhat valid, they might argue, it's only telling you what it smells like from your human nose, or it's only showing you how your human eyes see it. Now, I think the objectivist answer to the empiricist there is that if you're holding omniscience as the standard, if your standard is that either you see everything the way God would see it, like know it all from every possible angle all at once, then of course you're setting the bar in a place that's impossible. So everything is contextual. Yes, your eyes see reality a certain way. They see reality exactly the way eyes see reality. So it's not invalid. It's perfectly correct to trust your eyes or to consider them as, I guess, axiomatically true. Okay, so the mind versus body dichotomy has plagued man through history, and the philosophers have notoriously driven those two things farther apart than ever. And I've only begun to scratch the surface. I mean, once you get into modern philosophy, I'm not even going to try to go near Immanuel Kant and those that came after him. You're going to have to turn to somebody more bona fide than I to explain that. But the mind versus body dichotomy it's a serious thing to understand, I think, when looking at the history of thought and in your own life, when dealing with your own struggles. Maybe you've struggled with mental health in one way or another. Ask yourself, or try to introspect and ask, like, have I separated the mind from the body? Like, do I believe things that in some way don't consist with the evidence of the senses, or am I concrete bound? Am I clinging just to the immediate and rejecting philosophy? Because I think the more we do that, the more we end up completely mentally upset and confused, and it's impossible to separate the mind from the body. So when you attempt to do this, and check out Leonard Peikoff's lecture series, which was also transcribed into a book called Understanding Objectivism, and he talks a lot about how the rationalists, the people who embrace the mind, and the empiricists, the people who embrace the senses, and the two reject one another, they end up resembling one another. So the rationalists, they reject the senses and only embrace ideas. But then what do they do about the immediate? They become concrete bound. So now they're the ones who are immediately clinging to the immediate evidence of their senses, but they don't want to tie it to ideas, because ideas and the senses cannot be related. And on the flip side, the empiricists, the people who cling to the sense data but are suspicious of ideas, they still need to conceptualize. They still need to think and use ideas and abstractions on some level, but they don't trust abstractions near their sense data. So they end up following abstractions or ideas detached from the senses. And now they're looking like the rationalists. Do you see how the two superficial enemies are really just two sides of the same false dichotomy coin? The mind versus body. Okay, all of this just to bring us back to the hippies. Now let's look at the hippies. How would you describe them? I would say they're largely known for hedonistic behavior, so indulgence in drugs, orgies, and just kind of following the whims, following the feelings, the urges, and also kind of anti-philosophical. Like that was what Ayn Rand, I think, points out in Return of the Primitive in one of the essays, how like when the news media would ask these students, these rebels, like, what is it you're for? Like, you're rebelling, but what is it you want? Or what is it you believe? Whatever, man. No, whatever. Like, you think, like, don't overthink it, or don't think at all, seems to be how the hippies would look at the world. And I mean, it's not just them. I mean, like I mentioned, they were influenced by the universities, and you can see that attitude all throughout the culture if you're checking for it. Now, how does the mind versus body dichotomy relate to the hippies? This is where I think it gets kind of interesting. In one respect, they're embracing the body by being so physically indulgent in drugs and orgies, right? So it would seem like, oh, they're embracing the body. But in another respect, they disdain wealth. They disdain capitalism and wealth and very earthly things. They're rejecting so many things that make human life pleasant here in the body. So in one respect, they're rejecting the body, and in another respect, they seem to be embracing it by getting high all the time. On the flip side, what's their attitude towards the mind? On one hand, like I said, they are rejecting philosophy by saying, "Don't, whatever, man. No, I don't want to think." Which made them, in Ayn Rand's view, I think, like kind of worse than the Marxists, like more dangerous. I think Rand said in that book or somewhere in an interview, she said, like, I could have a better conversation with a Marxist. Like, I could have a better conversation with a Marxist and understand where we disagree, what we each believe. But the hippies, they've just rejected philosophy and systematic thought altogether. Okay, so they reject philosophy, which makes it look a lot like they're rejecting the mind. But in another respect, they talk about spirituality and this out-of-body experience, and their kind of rationale for getting high and having indiscriminate, sloppy orgies is that they're, transcending, and it's taking them to a spiritual realm. So spiritual, what does it mean? I mean, if you could put it into words, what they're saying outside the body, the mind, the spirit. You see, in one respect, they're rejecting the mind. In another respect, they're embracing it. In one respect, they're rejecting the body. In another respect, they're embracing it. So this is a very, very advanced level cancer. This is the errors in philosophy and the doubling down of errors and the complete S-word show, I'll say, on this family program that philosophy had become and permeated. He was now finally... I think the philosophers were coming home to roost when you see in the hippie revolution and the hippie culture, this allegedly radical new revolutionary revolution was really just a bunch of kids listening to exactly what their professors were telling them in school and acting accordingly. Okay, what does all this have to do with the Body Shop? So the Body Shop was founded by a lady named Anita. You would think I would have her last name in front of me, but I prepared for this episode in terms of what I wanted to talk about, but I actually forgot to write down the name of the actual lady. But she was a hippie lady, and she had a husband and two boys, and her husband, little kids. The husband decided to go off on a 2-year horseback riding trip from somewhere in the middle of South America all the way to New York City, a 2-year horseback riding trip. Because why not, man? Just because I got a couple kids to feed doesn't mean I shouldn't go follow this spiritual calling to ride a horse across 2 continents. What are you, uptight, man? My kids will be fine. I need erotic. Thank you, Scott. I almost was going to say I need a Broderick earlier, but I was reluctant. Man, if I want to ride my horse across the continent, my kids will be fine. Children are wise, and their children are smarter than us. They're wise. They're spiritually elevated. They'll be fine. They don't need me to get some corporate job. They don't need me to participate in the evil capitalist, decadent system just to get them food, man. They were spiritually fulfilled. So yeah, go on a horseback riding trip, dude. Just have a nice time. Don't worry about the kids you just gave birth to. And Enric in the chat is talking about Rousseau was their philosopher. Anti-civilization, anti-reason, return to the primitive. And you can see in this attitude that children are pure and wise, and they're corrupted by society. That sounds like Rousseau, doesn't it? In my understanding. So while Anita's husband is riding his horse across 2 continents, following his spiritual calling, man, she needed to figure out, how am I going to feed my kids and myself? So she had the idea to open an eco-friendly, whatever it was called back then. I don't know if it was called eco-friendly, but it was an eco-friendly, bath bath and body shop, you know, like I said, soap, shampoo, and lotion and stuff like that. But it was as eco-friendly as can be was the whole pitch. You know what I'm saying? Like the bottles that your lotion comes in or your shampoo comes in, you hold on to that bottle. First of all, the bottle itself is like a reused urine sample container from the hospital. So it's, you know, it's recycled, it's eco, we're saving plastic, or we're saving whatever material it is, plastic. So you get that, you use that, then you hold on to it and you bring it back to the store to refill it with shampoo. Isn't that clever? Rather than me needing to spend money on extra bottles to sell you, you can hold on to your bottle and I'll refill it with the shampoo, and I'll charge you a little extra money to sustain this eco-friendly store, and I'll pass the environmentalist virtue on to you. So this store was a phenomenon, the Body Shop. It was a smashing success right away. It broke records in the stock market. I think Anita, Miss Roddick, was maybe a record breaker as far as women in business. And certainly the Body Shop either it broke records or came close to breaking records when it first went public in the market. So very, very successful right away. People wanted, I mean, like I talked about how this mind versus body split, it takes like a third or fourth dimensional form by the time you're looking at the hippies. And now when you look at a store like the Body Shop, it is taking renunciation to the next level, or it's taking the mind versus body split. It's taking the contradictions of hippie existence into the sort of corporate marketplace. And now, as one article described it, like you can be taking a bubble bath in luxury while being virtuous. So much for renunciation and for rejoining nature, quote unquote. No, you're rejoining nature. You're doing your part to, you know, fight the man and to undo the footprint of civilization. You are doing that by shopping at the Body Shop. Isn't that nice? I mean, you see, you know how I sometimes sarcastically say, like, you know, send us super chats to fight the left, which is kind of like a modern type of iteration of this attitude you see on the internet. Like, we send a super chat, but not because we want the money, it's because it fights the left. You know, kind of what you see with the Body Shop is buy our shampoo and save the planet. Yeah, I just want to emphasize again, like, you can be virtuous, but now normally being virtuous would mean suffering, right? Isn't that what altruism normally calls for? And certainly this movement that tends to reject the human civilization and existence and capitalism, certainly there you would think to be virtuous, you need to suffer and live like a minimalist. But we found a loophole, says Anita. We found a loophole. Whether she ever said that or not, I think her actions imply that. We found a loophole. You're gonna participate in the corporate capitalist system, and I'm gonna participate in it, and I'm gonna sell you stuff, and you're gonna buy this shampoo. But we're actually being virtuous because it's an eco-friendly bottle that you're gonna I'm not gonna have to replace. You're gonna pay a little extra for it. You're going to get to enjoy a beautiful, luxurious bathroom experience. And I'm going to have one of the most successful companies of all time to this point. So, of course, you know, you might be able to tell I'm a little bit cynical describing what took place. You know, contradictions don't exist, and like, you can't live with a contradictory mind versus body split and live at all and not end up with this sort of topsy-turvy situation. You can see kind of how environmentalism is an integrating philosophy, in integrating religion, right? Like the way that environmentalism and its method of being practiced and advocated for, it allows you to live in civilization, to participate in the capitalist system, but also to kind of feel good about yourself and to say, I'm part of the solution. It usually means spending extra money, but you can sort of alleviate the guilt by pushing for the opposite thing than what you're actually doing. So environmentalism also allows you to embrace science, even though sometimes it's pseudoscience, or it's, I guess, very selective science, right? Very selective. Like, okay, these many scientists said there's catastrophic, climate change coming about because of human activity. That might be a very selective way of reporting what most scientists are saying in many cases. But you get to embrace science. You don't need to see science as this evil, white man's capitalist handmaiden of commercialism, as it's probably been described. I mean, there are people, unironically, this has been happening for decades, but we're seeing it in mainstream culture more recently. People, unironically, they say, no, science is racist. Isaac Newton was a white man. He only saw things through his white eyes. And the scientists of that time and since largely pushed away or did not allow in Black and other types of people into their community. So basically you end up with a bunch of white men giving you the science. So science is racist. I mean, this is how people interpret what they see around them. This is why philosophy is so important. It sounds silly when I'm sort of rehashing what they say, but grown adults unironically believe this stuff. And civilization cannot sustain such irrationality. Environmentalism, however, is a good integrating philosophy and or religion, however you look at it, in terms of allowing people to live in the modern world, but also think they're doing their part to fight against it. It's kind of like the church would allow you to donate money to the church, and that'll get you into heaven, even though you're a sinful, wealthy businessman or just a sinful whatever you are. If you have some money to donate to the church, you can still buy your place into heaven. I see this as sort of analogous. You can live in the modern world and in light of living in the modern world, be causing quite a footprint on the planet. But by buying into the environmentalist dogma and engaging with it and supporting it financially and agitating for it, voting for certain people over others, and crippling businessmen any way you can in the name of environmental concerns, in various ways, and certainly just believing it, you can, sort of alleviate the guilt of living in the modern world. And look at how defensive people get about environmentalism. Like, look how triggered people get of all walks of life. It's not just far left people. You get a lot of people of various walks of life who really, really get very, very upset if you challenge their environmentalist beliefs, because it's a philosophy, certainly, and it is, I think, also a religion in many respects, the way it's treated. And people take philosophy seriously, whether they realize it or not, and they certainly take religion very seriously. Whether they admit it or not. Now, whatever ended up happening with the Body Shop is there was an article a few years after the successful launch of the Body Shop. An article came out exposing a lot of, hypocrisies or just general misinformation that the company had engaged in by, it turned out they really were. Yeah, they're all just like many other companies. They were cutting costs by, let's say, going to the third world and hiring cheap labor, or they were, maybe their materials are not as eco-friendly as they had claimed. So in various ways, the Body Shop was just another corporation, and the cult dedication to the Body Shop dissipated and went away. But the company is still very much alive and well. You kind of see that sort of hippie culture sort of becoming the establishment now. By the time I'm alive and I'm, a teenager walking through the mall, I see the Body Shop and I'm just like, oh, yeah, just another store for Michelle Obama and Melania Trump to buy their soap. Like, it's just not, it has not, in my mind, has no association with, dismantling the capitalist system or minimizing the human footprint. So interesting to see what came after the hippies, who are the children of hippies, these very disillusioned, kind of like Kurt Cobain type of youngsters, like people, kind of a punk rock attitude, kind of like they sort of agree with the sort of anti-civilizational premises of their parents, but often they're very cynical about any attempt to fight the human footprint on the planet. And sooner or later, you see them all kind of turning into environmentalists, which is why like I said, environmentalism is sort of the religion of our time, I would say, but should not be and cannot be for long if we are going to have a civilization. So I would offer you Ayn Rand and her philosophy, not only for your own mental health in tying your mind to your body properly and securely, but I think civilization could benefit as well. Enric in the chat says hippies turn to punk. Interesting. I've always seen punk as like a response to the hippies. And I see punk rockers as they grow up, they turn into hippies. You know, they turn into John Lennon and give peace a chance and, you know, vote Democrat like your life depends on it. Although more recently, and I know here, God forbid we do an episode where I don't piss off the Trump fans. You see a lot of the hippies and punk rock types people largely gravitating to the Republican side of the aisle in recent years. And that's just a fact. And that's in part what's so scary about the developments. When you have two anti-intellectual parties running against one another, we're in trouble. So I agree. Sadly, I agree with the prediction that I've heard Yaron Brook make, which is that probably the unifier of this country will be a Christian environmentalist. There's a scary thought, and it's not inconceivable. It's very imaginable. Someone like Tucker Carlson, who is, you know, an environmentalist and takes religion seriously enough to appeal to that part of people. It's not inconceivable. All right, let me read a couple of your super chats. This is how the left is going to be beat, by you sending money to us. I'm obviously being silly, but thank you, unironically. Thank you for supporting the Ayn Rand Center UK, because it's the one of the few entities that, yes, is asking you for money, but not out of guilt. Well, I guilt trip you a little bit as a joke, but the idea is to support your values, and it ultimately leads to more rationally selfish people living free in the world and finding happiness in their own lives. So there's no contradiction we're trying to sustain with this type of nonprofit. I think ARCUK is a nonprofit. I should really find out. All right. Yes, it is a nonprofit. All right. Jonathan Honig with $1.99. Oh no, we're a for-profit. What am I saying? We are for-profit, and so should you be. I'm being corrected by the producer behind the scenes. Thank you, Jonathan, for the $1.99. Thank you, Gail, for the $2.99. Thank you, Marilyn, for the $4. Wow, everybody's really outdoing each other. And then Sammy is bored again with 99 pence. Thank you for that. All right, I guess that's all the time we have today. I would try to summarize it all. Well, I'll summarize it with a few just sort of bullet points. Just, you know, you look at the hippies. In some respects, they reject the mind and embrace the body. In some respects, vice versa. You should definitely see the hippies as the product of the intellectual developments in the world. So they're not these, you know, independent-minded people who rebelled against the system. No, they were produced and manufactured in the factory that is the university, in my estimation of things. And then something like the body shop, I think it symbolizes, it's a microcosm of how this type of hippie culture became the mainstream and very much became a part of the corporate world. And today, I think a lot of you will agree with this. Corporations, they virtue signal. Corporations, they constantly are telling you about how, yes, we might charge you a little extra money, but it's for a good cause, or even forget charging you extra money. Just here's what we believe. Here's our ethos. They might be good ethos at times. Okay, we are opposed to racism. That is a good thing. But for Christ's sake, you sell shampoo, you sell razors, you sell Coca-Cola. You know what I'm saying? At a certain point, like, can you just sell me what I need to buy, and we can move on with our lives? All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Coming up at 7 p.m. UK time. That's, I think, at the bottom of this hour. Coming right up, it's Lisa Van Dam, Joanna Williams, and Gareth Sturdy live in the UK. Still time to get there if you're in the UK. Get in your little golf cart or whatever you people drive over there. Get in that left lane and run in your car like Fred Flintstone and get down there immediately to watch this live event. Otherwise, watch it online like the rest of us, Coming up at 7 p.m. UK time, it's a panel called What Do Children Need to Know? Then at 10 p.m. UK time, it's Life on Earth with Robert and Amy. And the guest today is Luke Travers. He's got a book. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We'll jump over to Clubhouse now, and we want to know what you think. So we can schmooze a little bit on there before it's time to return to YouTube and watch the panel, What Do Children Need to Know?